But one thing that's really helpful as a construct to understand what is a design executive is we use a framework called strategic competence. And so we organize strategic value around functional value, business value, and then corporate value. And the further up you go, you will need to learn how to master outcomes driven to the business, driven to the corporation.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. To help support our mission spread knowledge, we have a very special guest in today's episode. Let's welcome Ching, the founder and CEO of Design Executive Council, the premier membership network dedicated to advancing strategic design leadership to the highest levels of business and society. DXC membership counts global public corporations and venture-backed enterprises, including senior design executives from industry giants like Adobe, Capital One, Cisco, JP Morgan Chase, SAP, Target, Warner Music Group, and many more. Before his vision materialized with DXC, Gordon honed his expertise across design leadership, operations, and marketing at global brands and startups, including Apple, Affirm, Synchrony, Fast, and AIESEC International. Originally from Vancouver, Canada, Gordon now brings his passion, expertise, and vision to San Francisco, driving DXC's commitment to magnifying the impact of design leadership on a global scale. In this episode, we dive deep into the role of design executive, contrasting it with other design positions and highlighting its strategic importance. We explore the significance of mindfulness in leadership, its impact on decision-making and team dynamics. In this episode, we also further address embracing failures as learning opportunities and fostering a culture of innovation and the crucial elements of resilience and adaptability in the design leadership realm. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. In this episode, we have a very special guest with us. Hi Gordon, welcome to Nodes of Design.
Hi.
So Gordon, how was your day so far?
It's good. You are my very first meeting, so you're getting the freshest of my brain. So it's nice to be here.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So if you could give a brief about yourself to our audience out there.
Hi everyone, my name is Gordon. I'm the founder and CEO of the Design Executive Council. We're a premier membership network for corporate design executives. Formerly a corporate design leader and also a marketer who worked in Silicon Valley for the last 7 years. And prior to that, my career started in a nonprofit for 5 years before I had my very first job in tech at Apple, based over in London.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So what was your journey into design? How did you start? And what are your tips on aspiring design leaders looking to advance their careers and make a meaningful impact?
When people ask me this, I think back to my childhood. If anyone knows or is a nerd, I played a lot of SimCity and Sims. And I often tell people I used a lot of the cheat codes because I didn't like to actually just play the full game. I wanted to just build and create really awesome, beautiful things. So my childhood was spent doing a lot of that stuff. Little did I know this could be a profession. So my very first degree was in human geography. I wanted to study cities because I played so much of those video games. So I spent a lot of time understanding how cities work, how you build for cities, how you think about the human experience, how you foster stakeholders and understand the community. So spending a lot of time doing that in my early years shaped some of my formative approaches to design. It's really rooted in that human understanding, but also understanding that there are systems that connect all sorts of things to make a city work. So this is way back before I even knew what user experience or design really meant in the digital sense. But it wasn't until I volunteered for a nonprofit called AIESEC. It's a leadership development organization. And my very first professional job was actually a social media manager. In my youth, I spent a lot of time on blogging websites. And I think I was a kind of an early digital native using blogging websites to meet friends on the internet. I was kind of a weird kid. And in doing so, I was exposed to graphic design. I remember making a lot of just basic graphics, trying to post on Twitter and Facebook at that time when it was still very young. And over the time, I started to learn the craft of digital marketing. So I spent 5 years working in that discipline in AIESEC, rising up to chief digital officer in their international office over in the Netherlands. And it was in that moment where I remember being tasked with considering how to redesign our global website. And this is a website in 120 countries. I didn't have Figma at the time or Sketch or anything like that. All I had was Keynote. So what I did was open Keynote, I drew rectangles, I drew basically what we now know as wireframes. And that was really the beginning of my, I would say, UX career. Knowing as a marketer, I was already doing these creative things, not just from a planning standpoint, but actually getting in the weeds of doing that. And so in doing that, that really jump-started my journey into design without being called a designer. And of course, I never went back to my human geography focus. I got to actually join Apple after that last role. Apple was a client of ours at that time. And I remember being in their London office, being just so inspired by what Apple was to me as a kid. I remember my dad gave me the iPhone. So when I was onboarding in Cupertino and I saw that quote about Steve Jobs talking about design is not just, how it looks, it's also how it works. That was the moment I started really digging even deeper into design, and meeting all sorts of people while living in Cupertino for a month really just exposed me to all sorts of things. So I made a commitment to myself that I would do this job well, but I would also figure out how to get to the world of design. And that's when I decided to pivot. In 2017, I enrolled in a boot camp. Little did I know how hard it would be to transition to design from a marketing profession. But I did it after a year and a half. I got my very first job at a public company called Synchrony. I joined a startup at that time, and I was their first design lead. So I learned how to work with the founder while also operating a really large bank. And that was my first time coming into the world of design. The advice I would give is, I think in the tech world specifically, we are often too obsessed with following recipes, frameworks, hacks to our careers. And I see so much of that out there. And I just remind myself that there's an inherent power in your individuality to really get a chance to get to know yourself and what special powers you bring to your world. And that could be expressed through your career. So in those early days, it can be really unnerving to really figure out, how to excel in your career, how to be really good at the job. But if there's one advice I would give is don't forget to build those really important relationships. That has set me up for any part of my career, no matter where I've gone, is do not forget about the human dimension. While you might be focused on users and making great products, don't forget about the people you work with, your colleagues, your teams, your mentors, your friends, your family. That part will set you up for long-term success. So focus on the people, and I almost feel everything else solves itself.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So let's get into our episode. So what does the role of a design executive entail, and how does it differ from other design positions?
Before I get into what a design executive is, let's just talk about, what everyone might be used to, being a designer. A designer is largely focused on functional work. So really rooted in the design discipline, thinking about how to create the very best experience for a given area. Now, as you rise in a company, the time spending designing products and experiences starts to change. You're now managing people, process, budgets, politics, and the things keep growing. But the thing that's really interesting about rising in the ranks is that you don't ever really let go of that specialty in design. You bring that mastery and expertise no matter where you go. The difference is you have to start translating it because you're now working with a really different set of people, not designers, but marketers, finance, procurement, legal, product management, engineering. And so the language of design needs to sometimes translate to make sense to other people. I often think about if you were to go visit your family after living abroad, would you still speak to them in the same way that you spoke to the people at work? You would kind of change the language. And I think this is the thing that I see often when design executives are starting to practice that skill, is they learn how to resonate with all sorts of people. They become a true partner to all sorts of people. They develop empathy for all sorts of backgrounds and understandings. Because at the end of the day, a design executive, when you rise to that level, you're now responsible for so much more than just design. It's people's lives, it's money, reputation. And so your ability to work around people will be central to your success. But one thing that's really helpful as a construct to understand what is a design executive is we use a framework called strategic competence. And so we organize strategic value around functional value, business value, and then corporate value. And the further up you go, you will need to learn how to master outcomes driven to the business, driven to the corporation. And it can be very uncomfortable for designers. And so becoming a design executive is almost like, I imagine, like a a caterpillar going to the cocoon and then becoming a butterfly. There's a very uncomfortable metamorphosis that everyone has to go through to become a design executive.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So how to define the strategic value of design within an organization? And what role does a design executive play in driving that value?
So it's interesting that today I'm a founder and a CEO. And strategic value, when I was a designer, it was a little confusing. It felt like this very huzzah word. It's like, be strategic. You need to be strategic. And I hear that all the time. And I was like, what does that really mean? And what it really means is this business exists for a reason. It has some purpose. I created my business for a reason. So when I say strategic, I think very simply, what is your reason for existence? And how you make the right choices to ensure its continued success and its existence. And because strategic, you're always in competition in a landscape of other players, you need to consider how you exist. And so when I think strategic value from a design standpoint, I think about how does design explicitly drive the success of the business? And every business has a slightly different flavor. Some prioritize design more than others. Some maybe a little less, and design plays a slightly different role. And when you think about strategic, you have to understand the situation. And I often describe situational awareness, the importance of understanding your surroundings, the implicit and the explicit. So you can start to pay attention with what really matters at the business. And a lot of times it's not just about KPIs. There's also a lot of intangible factors that drive strategic value. So when I think about design executives, they need to understand what drives success for that company, to really understand the CEO's priorities, but also be a true thought partner in understanding the landscape, the marketplace, of how they can drive the company towards greater success and defend its position from a competitive standpoint.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So in your experience, what are some practical ways to advocate for design at executive and board level and secure support for design-driven initiatives?
When you get to the executive level, or even when you're interfacing at the board level, you're now operating at a place where there are concrete goals, objectives, defined KPIs. And I often express there's two sides of the coin, right? There's the hard side and the soft side. The hard side being very explicit metrics that you and the company have set in motion that you need to achieve over periods of time. And then there are also softer qualities. So your relationships with the board, with the CEO and other C-suite members, and how those all interact together to drive the outcomes that you're looking for. So when you're at that level, you have to consider both sides of the coin. And I think for designers, it can be very tricky to figure out just how do I maneuver myself as someone who brings a distinct personality and skill set to the room. And figuring that out starts to unravel what exactly is the designer's strategic value in the room. And so I often encourage that deeper self-reflection because every design executive brings something different and every company needs something slightly different in the room. And so that's a kind of awareness that any individual wants to have when they get to that level, is to learn how to basically figure out those matching points, those connection dots of where value gets created.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So can you discuss the role of mindfulness and self-awareness in your leadership approach and how it impacts decision-making and interactions with your team?
When you're operating at an executive level, you are facing the most uncertainty, ambiguity of the organization. You're at the very top. And so the problems do not always have a clear answer. Emotions will run high. You will deal with very uncomfortable things because you're constantly growing. And so mindfulness plays a very important role because if you think about any leader who is overtly chaotic, doesn't have a mastery of their emotions, they will not make the best decisions. And I'm inspired in this area because I know your previous guest, Irene Au, she's also one of our advisors, and I paid a lot of attention to the energy she's brought to my thinking. And I know she's also a yoga teacher. And I think about when I practice yoga, I also feel a degree of calm, a degree of clarity. And a lot of that doesn't just happen in the yoga room. It also happens when you're alone and you're spending time doing the homework to reflect on exactly what are you really trying to do here. I think it can be so easy to get caught up in kind of that hamster wheel feeling that we are chasing something. But I think where mindfulness comes through is really boiling things down to the essence of what it really needs to be and focusing on that. So when you're thinking about an executive, they're dealing with competing priorities all the time. They're making trade-offs all the time. And so mindfulness helps them boil things down to an essence of what really matters, how they're going to spend those hours that they have available, and to drive the most incredible impact that they can. And so that's going to be the uncomfortable work that any executive has to do to really figure out where that impact comes from and what they can bring in their own unique way.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So how to approach failure and mistakes as a design executive? And what strategies to employ to foster a culture that embraces experimentation and learning from setbacks?
I also think the higher you go, the more mistakes you're going to make because the answers are not clear. And so I think about in a design culture, one of the number one attributes I really think about, I know we say curiosity a lot, but I actually want to push it a little further, is the element of play and joy. So I think about the fact that in design, we're constantly pushing what is beyond the status quo. And so there really is no answers. There's no correct answer. There is only a series of trials and tribulations to figure out what really resonates with people. And the faster we can get there, the better the product experience is going to be and the more successful the company is going to be. So if we don't have an element of curiosity, play, and joy, we can't get there because every setback, we will become frustrated, we blame people, and we don't create an environment where people can continue to be curious, continue to be inquisitive about how do we do this better. So I think for design executives, it is really important to foster that sense of play because it encourages everyone to come out of their shells, to bring their full selves to the room. And I think about when you put a group of adults on a playground, you kind of see their moods change. Or if you go on a swing, you see your spirits lift up and you have a very different kind of conversation. And so that's the kind of spirit I think about in a design organization. You really want to consider, how do I continually foster an element of play? Even if we start to grow larger with more complexity, we always want to retain that energy so that the spirit of design is really there. The joy is front and center. And I think that energy transfers over back to your users and the stakeholders you create for. So don't forget about the element of play. I think it is such an important element to make sure that it stays important, but also casual, curious, and inquisitive, and that people can really engage in dialogue and critique and debate about what is going to be the very in each other's feelings because there's play involved.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So can you discuss the importance of resilience and adaptability in the mindset of a design executive? And what strategies do you use to maintain a positive and optimistic mindset, especially during the high pressure or demanding projects?
So resilience, I think back to the element of play. Adaptability, I think back to the element of mindfulness. Play and resilience, because I think about when you're constantly up against a challenge, you're walking up a mountain and you're sweating and it's really uncomfortable. How do you remain a positive spirit no matter what challenges are thrown at you? And to reframe any challenge as an opportunity for growth and learning. And when we view anything as an opportunity to learn, it turns away that kind of aggressive nervousness that we might feel when we're facing something so scary and so unknown. And so when we keep learning front and center, I often find the optimist within us comes to light. And that optimist is going to carry us through no matter what challenges are thrown at us. And adaptability, because you can see that future, you can see that vision, you're not getting lost in the darkness of a challenge. Rather, you see the light of how to move that forward. And so adaptability means you're going to have to learn how to inject that element of understanding the landscape, hearing yourself with a compass. That's where mindfulness comes into play, right? You need to understand who you are, how you carry yourself, and what you're going to do and not do, right? And you're going to have to draw boundaries. So without that element, it's really hard to adapt because you then become everything else, which means you're going to become nothing. So if you adapt too much also, you can also lose yourself. And so one of the insights I remember in my thesis studies, studying design executives, I interviewed a lot of chief design officers. And one of the insights that I remembered was, in the early days of your career, the biggest challenge is to think beyond oneself. And at the end stage of your career, at the top of the pyramid, is how to think and not lose yourself. Because everyone's asking so much of you, you need to have a compass and you need to be mindful about who you are, what you represent, so you can stand on your principles, your values, your morals and ethics, but also have a degree of adaptability so that you can actually be a partner and a collaborative individual working with all sorts of different people with different personalities and interests. And so that's a delicate balance any design leader or any leader in general has to deal with, I think particularly in design, because we have such a strong association with our identity, our creativity, learning how to be a little bit more flexible, but also being true to yourself is going to be a critical skill for any design executive that is effective. If we're too rigid, we won't move forward. If we're too flexible, we don't know what we are anymore. So that's kind of what I've discovered in talking to so many executives, is that delicate balance. It's this omnipresence of these two dualities. And that's often how I describe this really critical area.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So how do you see the future of design leadership evolving? And what emerging trends or technologies do you think will shape the role?
So I think every maybe, decade or two, there is some emergent technology that completely changes the world. I think about when I first got my computer, my first iPhone, what happened to the world then. And then I think about what happened when we started getting apps and how that transformed the world. I think about today, where we're getting computers that can talk back to us in some way, and they become our partners and friends in some way. So no matter what change is coming, I think what's interesting about artificial intelligence in particular is that it's starting to continue to take away some of the busy work from our lives. And that's just been a general trend over, any sense of the Industrial Revolution to today, right? It's picking up the pace of how humans can do more with a little bit less. And so I think about the designer and the design organization today is we've noticed, a general shrinkage lately, right? We've seen layoffs, we've seen budget reductions, we've seen uncertainty about what the future of design looks like in a world of automation and increased production efficiencies. With a click of a button, I can now generate websites and interfaces and graphics, entire paragraphs and books. So when that starts happening, where does that leave all of us? I think there's a lot of fear mongering that, design is going to die and it's going to disappear. But I think if we come back to the very core essence of what design is, it is about human ingenuity. It's about human creativity. It's about connecting things that might not be connected to make something even more meaningful. And one executive in our advisory group, she shared how we think designers are going to be more of system thinkers and designers increasingly. And I'm a sci-fi fan, so I think about movies I love to watch. And I imagine maybe 10 years from now, we will be like waving our hands in the air, speaking out loud, and things will just come to life. We don't need to worry about changing that pixel or perfecting that thing. Things will just work because standards have been built for decades and technology is starting to help us move faster. So it can feel a little scary in the now because a lot of the change management is happening. But I think to the future of what creativity means, I actually think it's unlocking the potential for humans to be even more creative and manifest and close that distance between intention and idea and reality. And so if you just reflect on that, you can start to imagine, where does this put the designer or the creative in a business setting? I actually think it kind of democratizes a bit of creativity and design to more people. It gives the paintbrush to more people. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's actually a good thing for humanity overall. I think the real question is just, what will be the role of the design leader in orchestrating a cohesive experience? Because it's not just about one, it's about many. It's about a total brand, a total system, an ecosystem. So how do you weave all these products and services and cultures and brands together? That's going to be a really interesting role, I think, for the future of design, where it's moving away from just pure pixels, from interfaces, to now larger scales of constructs like organizational cultures, like systems, like ecosystems, or entire markets. Right? So that's the kind of excitement I feel that design leadership can be heading towards. But it's going to be urgent for us as a profession to really think about, how do we start evolving the strategic value of design? And strategic value consistently evolves with the state of the world, right? And so those are the things I would really pay attention to of how design leadership is evolving.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So could you please share with us, how does your day look like? Any interesting stories?
Yes, I have many interesting stories, but I will focus just on the general rhythm of my life nowadays. I think there's a lot of curiosity of what it's like to go from corporate design leadership to now starting a company, becoming a founder and CEO. I think what Brian Chesky has been going through for some time now, I'm like, okay, I have a small sample of what you might be going through. And I think what's really interesting about what my day look like nowadays is everything I just talked about in the podcast earlier: ambiguity, uncertainty, joy, play, trade-offs. These are things every day I am facing to the highest degree I've ever faced. Never in my life, despite being in all sorts of roles, companies, leadership positions, I've now realized starting something from 0 to 1 is one of the hardest things you can do. And not only is it hard, I am designing a membership network for people I admire, people I respect. And so what my day looks like nowadays is connecting with a lot of these friends, but also one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've had to go through is a designer thinking about pricing, a designer thinking about sales, a designer thinking about marketing. And every day I am going through these conversations and experiences where I'm like, wow, the degree of ambiguity that you have to maneuver every day as a founder is insane. And so one thing that I feel is so valuable in an unstructured world like this is to surround yourself with really positive, playful, joyful, optimistic, and brilliant people. And that's what I've been focused on. I'm focusing on the journey. There's an outcome I want to get to. There's a North Star I see. But more importantly is my journey there, my company that surrounds me, the team that I've placed myself with, the advisors. And so my day-to-day nowadays is constant conversations with these people, constant conversations with design leaders all across the country to really figure out how do we build the best membership network for design executives? How do we advance the state of design 10 years from now, but also just to next year? These are the types of things I'm working through every day and really thinking, how do we make design executives effective in supporting their journeys from becoming a design leader to a corporate leader, to a board member, to a chief design officer. So my day is pretty much that, and it's become so focused and singular that I almost feel like that has become my life in a lot of ways. And so my day nowadays is very much that. It's an amalgamation of people. Again, thinking about orchestration is how do you weave together all these moving parts into one thing that resonates with the world? That's the hard job of a founder, I find, is constant maneuvering of people, processes, services that you have to sell, and just trying to focus as much as possible and not get distracted by other things. So that's kind of what my day looks like. And it does definitely require nerve, as I've now learned, the nerve to believe and the nerve to try and the nerve to take a risk and actually go all in into it. That's a commitment that it feels. And I think why the emotions are so different than what I felt in corporate, because it's now your baby. So that's what my day looks like. And I am so grateful for my team and the community in coming along on this journey with me.
Thank you so much, Gordon. So we'll conclude the show by your 3 favorite book recommendations.
Yeah, so I have a theme of books, 3 of them specifically that I'd like to recommend. And these are books I haven't talked about before to the world. The first one is this book called Designing Design by Kenya Hara. I don't know if you guys know about it, but he's a Japanese creative director, most famous for Muji. This book inspires me because, when you first open the book, you'll see a different texture of paper from the rest of the book. And I'm like, those are the details that inspire me in so many ways. And the way he talks about design is not through some recipe or hack. It's really through that artistry, through that soul, the love he has for what he does. And you see it and you learn through osmosis. The second book recommended by my former leader, Deb Kawamoto. She was my boss at Affirm. We went on an offsite, and this book she recommended to all of us called The True North. And what it really is how to lead authentically as a leader. And it talks about finding your crucible moment. What was that moment that really defined you, and leaning into that, because that will help you shape the compass that I talked about earlier. So books like these are really valuable because it helps heighten your self-awareness, but also the resilience because you now understand yourself a little bit better. And another book that I've recently come across is CEO Excellence. It's written by a group of McKinsey partners, and it talks about the 6 mindsets that distinguish the best leaders from the rest. And they studied CEOs like I am studying, design executives, and you start to pick up on patterns and themes of what distinguishes those who are really effective. And so these are the types of books that are interesting because they cross design and artistry to leadership and authenticity, to leadership effectiveness as a CEO. And these are the types of books I'm reading nowadays that cross a couple mediums. So I hope these books help whoever is listening to this in your journey in becoming a better design leader.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for those wonderful recommendations. We're looking forward to host you again in upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
man.